This video is about one of my favorite things, scales and arpeggios. So it's about why we do the practice and also how to do the practice. So scales and arpeggios are the fundamentals that make up loads and loads of pieces. Every piece that you play uses a scale of one form or another because the scale is an organization of notes. And there are all different kinds of scales. The ones that we use often in classical music are the major and minor versions. But there are also blues scales and pentatonic scales and all of these different things that form the foundation for different styles of music. So it's important to know scales for your understanding of different kinds of music, for your preparation for repertoire. It's also important because you'll learn the geography of your fingerboard really well. You'll know where all the A's are and all the B's are, and you'll be able to visualize them, which is really helpful. It's also to help you to improve your technique because we do lots of bowing exercises and rhythmic variations and things like that when we do scales. So we get really good at playing very, very quickly in successive notes in scales and arpeggios, and playing different parts of the bow, playing at different sounding points. There are so many variations on how you can play a scale that you can use your scales and your arpeggios to work on techniques that you have in repertoire that you are working on now, or repertoire that you're going to see in the future. So there's that. But I think my most important and the thing that I really makes me love doing my scales is that scales are just another form of tonalization. Scales are a way of learning how your instrument makes the best sound on every single note, and learning how you feel your violin as an extension of yourself. So I think scales and arpeggios are something that we all need to be doing, especially as we get in the Suzuki repertoire to Book 4, because Book 4, for instance, in the Vivaldi A minor concerto, starts to really have a lot of passage work that is built on scales and arpeggios. So it's really good to have studied them a little bit at least by the time you get there, outside of just the scales, the 1 octave and 2 octave scales we've done before. So I'm going to take a moment to talk about what you've got, the resources that you have to play your scales, and how to use them. So the book that I recommend to the studio is Barbara Barber's Scales for Young Violinists. It's published by Alfred, and the first one to get is just the Scales for Young Violinists, but as you progress, if you're in books 6, 7, 8, maybe you want to get the advanced version because it has more 3 octave scales. On page 2 are bowing and rhythmic variations. So you can apply these, and you can apply things that you make up as well to every note of a scale or arpeggio to, as I mentioned before, to help improve your technique or to help you master a bowing pattern or bow stroke. No matter what scale book you're using, however, the first thing to do is to pick a scale and pick a fingering. So there are many different ways. There are lots of scale systems, but you want to choose the fingering that you're going to use for that week. You can always go back and do a different fingering. In fact, most scale books have more than one option. For my students, what I recommend is doing, as much as is possible, doing the scale first in first position, just to make sure that you know what notes you're playing. And then going back and doing one with a shift. So I'm going to use the page of A from Barbara Barber's book as an example. In the major scale, it's completely in first position. It's a 2 octave scale. So if you go along in your reading, all the numbers there make sense. All the fingerings make sense. If you go on the bottom, though, on the bottom of the scale are different fingerings. So if I'm going along and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 2, then I know that shift is right there, and there's actually a line. You really can't see it. There it is. There's the line there. So if there's a note that normally in first positions play with a 3, but then there's a 2 underneath it, that means you have to shift. And that's the shift that you isolate, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's just how to read the fingerings. But as I was saying, you need to pick the fingering that you're going to do for that practice. Then get your metronome, set it on 60. My foot is a wonderful metronome today, but you need to use a real one. And then the first stage of practice is to play one bow, one note, and to play a minim. So we would go. And so on, making sure that you know that the notes are in tune, you have a good sound, and you're playing the finger that you chose on that note. So that's what you do first with your scales and your arpeggios. If you are doing one that has a shift, it's really important that you really master the shift at this stage. So let's say, again, the example of the A major scale. There's a shift that goes 1, 2, semitone shift. So we need to make a shifting exercise. So we've got C, that's where we're going. So I start on C, into the audible shift practice. And that's a very small shift. It doesn't matter what the size is. You have to make sure that you really are landing the shift really well within a slur. And then you go in, by the way, that shift is written out for you in Barbara Barber's books, which is why I really like it and why everybody should have a copy. It's in the Preparatory Shifts. Just make copies so it's easier to show you, but definitely get the book. So that's the third line there, but it gives you on the top, the first position, so you play that to get the sound, and then on the bottom is the shift from the bottom fingering of the scale in the book, which is the one that I just played. I hope that's clear, not too confusing. Okay, so once you can do it in the slur, then you start to shift later and later. We're going to do it in separate bows because we're doing separate here. So I'll shift in the middle of the bow, go. I'll shift in the upper half. And now I'm going to shift so that the new note starts on the up bow. So I'm shifting as late as possible in the down bow. Now. So that's how you can kind of work the bow change in. Other videos to come on that, I'm sure. Okay. So when you're doing your shifts, when you're doing your scales, you start with that practice.